The rain had been falling for hours when Shadow first appeared on Mulberry Street, her ribs pressed against matted fur, each labored breath visible in the humid air. Most passers-by quickened their steps, eyes averted from another stray in a town with too many. But when elderly Martha Wilson approached, Shadow's demeanor transformed instantly. The German shepherd's ears flattened against her skull as she dropped to the wet pavement, rolling to expose her belly in a practiced motion, her amber eyes, clouded with exhaustion, fixed on Martha with unmistakable desperation. Then came the whimper, not begging for food, but something more urgent, more profound. "Aren't you the strangest thing?" Martha murmured, pausing despite the rain soaking through her jacket. Shadow scrambled to her feet, took 3 steps toward the abandoned Miller property, then returned to perform her routine again. More desperate this time, more urgent. What nobody yet understood was that Shadow wasn't begging for herself. Hidden away, 3 tiny lives were fading with each passing hour. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Pinewood Creek, Alabama, wasn't the kind of place that appeared on postcards or travel blogs. A fading dot on the map where the once prosperous lumber mill had closed 5 years ago, leaving behind weathered storefronts and a community stubbornly holding on to better days. The main street still boasted Miss Lila's Diner, where locals gathered to exchange gossip over bottomless coffee, and Hank's Hardware, which sold everything from fishing tackle to emergency generators for the storms that frequently swept through the humid southern landscape. It was into this close-knit world that Olivia Thompson had inserted herself 3 months ago, renting the small blue cottage at the edge of town. At 32, Olivia carried herself with the careful composure of someone who had reassembled herself after breaking. Her camera bag, a constant companion, hung from her shoulder as she documented the quiet dignity of small-town life for a series she wasn't sure she'd ever publish. The locals had labeled her the city girl, though Atlanta was hardly the cosmopolitan metropolis they imagined. What they didn't know was that Olivia had once dedicated her life to animal rescue, working with the largest shelter in Georgia until the incident that still haunted her dreams. The shelter fire had claimed 27 animals despite her desperate attempts to save them. The scars on her forearms had faded to silvery lines, but the ones inside remained raw. She hadn't touched an animal since. Frank Miller's property sat on 3 acres at the edge of town, the white farmhouse now gray with neglect since his absence. Locals speculated he'd simply abandoned the place and his dog when his military pension no longer covered his needs. The property had become something of a local eyesore, with Sheriff Calloway occasionally threatening to condemn it, but never following through. Shadow had appeared in town 2 weeks earlier, growing progressively thinner and more desperate. Some folks left food, which disappeared quickly. But the dog never stayed around long enough for anyone to approach her. Her bizarre behavior, the rolling, the pleading eyes, the strange dance of advancing and retreating had become something of a local curiosity. Some found it amusing, others considered it a nuisance. No one suspected the truth. No one except Olivia, who recognized desperation when she saw it. The morning Olivia first encountered Shadow began like any other in her new, carefully constructed life. She rose at 6, made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and sat on her porch swing watching dawn break over the pines. Her camera rested in her lap, unused. Some mornings, the weight of it felt like an accusation, a reminder of how she now documented life instead of participating in it. "Another day in paradise," she murmured to herself, the phrase an ironic ritual. The weather report had promised storms by evening, the kind that turned the creek into a roaring, angry thing and sent locals to stock up on batteries and bottled water. Her phone buzzed with an email from her editor in Atlanta, wondering when she'd have the small-town America photo series ready. She ignored it, as she had the previous 3. Time moved differently here in Pinewood Creek, or at least that's what she told herself to justify her inertia. As she walked toward the Miss Lila's for breakfast, she first noticed the German shepherd sitting alertly beneath the oak tree in the town square. Even from a distance, Olivia could see the animal was in rough shape, ribs visible, coat dull and patchy in places. Yet there was a dignity in how the dog held herself, a quiet intelligence in her amber eyes that made Olivia pause mid-step. "That's Frank Miller's dog," came a voice beside her. Martha Wilson, the town's self-appointed historian and gossip-in-chief, had appeared as if summoned by Olivia's interest. The elderly woman clutched her pocketbook like it might contain state secrets. "Been hanging around town for weeks now, doing the strangest thing to anyone who'll give her the time of day." "What thing?" Olivia asked, surprising herself by engaging. She usually avoided Martha's conversations, which had a way of becoming invasive interrogations about her past. "Just you watch. Henry's coming down the sidewalk now." Sure enough, as the postman approached, the dog Shadow, Martha called her suddenly transformed, her ears flattened, her body lowered to the ground, and she rolled onto her back, paws curled pleadingly in the air. The display lasted only seconds before she righted herself, took 3 deliberate steps toward the edge of town, looked back with what could only be described as expectation, then returned to repeat the performance when Henry kept walking. "See what I mean? Been doing that same routine to everybody. Some folks think she's simple in the head. Frank probably dumped her when she went funny." Olivia frowned. "That doesn't look like a mental problem. It looks trained, deliberate." Martha sniffed. "Well, Frank was military, always training that dog to do something or other. Shame what happened to him, though I can't say I'm surprised. Man kept to himself too much." Before Olivia could ask what had happened to Frank, Martha had launched into a detailed account of Mrs. Peterson's gallbladder surgery. By the time Olivia extracted herself from the conversation, Shadow had disappeared. Throughout the day, Olivia found herself thinking about the dog. There had been something in those amber eyes, something beyond hunger or abandonment. During lunch, she overheard Sheriff Calloway at the counter of Miss Lila's, complaining about that Miller dog becoming a nuisance. "Folks are saying she's getting aggressive, following them," he said between bites of chicken-fried steak. "Might have to call county animal control if she keeps it up." "She's not aggressive," Olivia found herself saying, drawing surprised looks from the lunch crowd. It was possibly the most words she'd strung together publicly since arriving in town. "She's trying to communicate something." Sheriff Calloway's weathered face creased with amusement. "Well now, Dr. Doolittle? What's she saying then?" Laughter rippled through the diner. Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks as she dropped money on the table and left without answering. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered, transforming the day into premature dusk. Olivia was returning from the grocery store, arms laden with storm supplies, when she spotted Shadow again. The dog was performing her routine for Mrs. Gunderson, who was swatting her away with an umbrella. "Get go on now, mangy thing." Shadow dodged the umbrella, but didn't run away. Instead, she continued her desperate pantomime, rolling, pleading, taking those few steps before returning. "Stop that!" Mrs. Gunderson snapped. "Jim Calloway's going to have you put down. And good riddance." Something snapped in Olivia. Then a protective instinct she thought had burned away in the shelter fire. She set her groceries down on a bench and approached. "I'll handle this. Mrs. Gunderson." The elderly woman looked relieved. "Thank heavens. That beast has been pestering everyone for days." As Mrs. Gunderson hurried away, Olivia crouched down, maintaining a safe distance from Shadow. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice rusty with disuse when it came to speaking to animals. "What are you trying to tell everyone?" Shadow's ears perked up. She studied Olivia with an intensity that felt almost human, then began her routine again, dropping down, rolling over, those pleading eyes. "You want me to follow you, is that it?" The dog immediately stood, tail giving a single hopeful wag. She took several steps toward the edge of town, looking back with unmistakable intent. Olivia hesitated. The first fat raindrops had begun to fall, and thunder growled in the distance. The sensible thing would be to grab her groceries and head home, to call animal control, perhaps, and let professionals handle whatever was happening with this stray. But those eyes, those desperate, intelligent eyes. "Okay," Olivia said finally. "Show me." Shadow led her through town at a pace just short of running, pausing occasionally to ensure Olivia was still following. The rain intensified, soaking through Olivia's light jacket. They passed the last of the town's houses, continuing down the old logging road that led, Olivia realized, straight to the abandoned Miller property. "Is this where you lived, girl with Frank?" At the sound of her former owner's name, Shadow whined softly, but continued her determined march. As they approached the weathered farmhouse, however, Shadow veered away from the main building toward a dilapidated shed at the edge of the property. The structure listed dangerously to one side, its roof partially collapsed. Thunder cracked overhead as Shadow disappeared into the dark interior. Olivia paused at the entrance, suddenly aware of what she was doing, following a strange dog into an abandoned building during a thunderstorm. The kind of decision horror movie audiences screamed at. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself. "Absolutely crazy." From inside came a soft, pleading whine. Taking a deep breath, Olivia pulled out her phone and switched on its flashlight. "I'm coming in," she called, as if the dog would understand, and ducked through the low doorway. What the beam of light revealed stopped her heart. In the feeble light of her phone, Olivia saw Shadow hurry to a nest of tattered blankets in the corner of the shed. There, barely visible, were 3 tiny puppies huddled together. Their eyes were still closed, small bodies trembling with each thunderclap that shook the deteriorating structure. But it wasn't their mere presence that made Olivia gasp. It was their condition. 2 of the puppies were clearly German shepherds, miniature versions of Shadow with the distinctive markings despite their young age. The third, however, was smaller, with a predominantly white coat marked with brown patches, clearly not Shadow's biological offspring. "Oh my God," Olivia whispered, crouching down for a closer look. Shadow whined anxiously, nudging her puppies with her nose. Up close, Olivia could see how dire the situation was. All 3 puppies were severely undernourished, their little rib cages visible even through their infant fur. Worse, there were angry red wounds on 2 of them, what looked like animal bites, possibly from raccoons or rats that had found the vulnerable litter during Shadow's trips to town seeking help. The smallest one, the odd-looking puppy, was in the worst shape. Its breathing was shallow, and it barely moved when Shadow licked its small form. "You weren't begging for food for yourself," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "You were trying to save them." Shadow looked up at her with those intelligent eyes, and Olivia could have sworn there was acknowledgement there, relief that finally someone understood. The shed's roof creaked ominously as another blast of thunder shook the air. Rain was beginning to drip through in multiple places, and one corner of the dilapidated structure was already flooding. "This place isn't safe," Olivia said, making a quick decision. "We need to move them." She shrugged off her rain jacket and carefully laid it flat. One by one, she gently placed the puppies on it, wrapping them together for warmth. The 2 German Shepherd puppies squirmed weakly at her touch, but the smaller one remained frighteningly still. "It's okay," she found herself murmuring, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Shadow or herself. "I'm going to help them." Shadow watched her every move with alert attention, occasionally whining but never interfering. There was trust in that gaze. Olivia realized trust she wasn't sure she deserved. Gathering the makeshift bundle carefully, Olivia looked around the shed. Through a gap in the wall, she spotted the main house. Though abandoned, it would provide better shelter than this collapsing structure. "Come on, girl. We need to get to the house." The dash through the intensifying storm was harrowing. Olivia hunched over the puppies, trying to shield them from the driving rain while Shadow pressed against her legs, guiding her toward the back door of the Miller house. To Olivia's surprise, the door wasn't locked. It swung open with a haunting creak when she turned the knob. The interior was musty but largely intact. Dust sheets covered what furniture remained, and there were signs of Frank Miller's hasty departure mail piled on a table, dishes still in the sink, a half-empty coffee mug fossilized with mold, but it was dry and, most importantly, stable. Olivia laid the bundled puppies on what appeared to be a living room couch, carefully unwrapping them. Shadow immediately jumped up, circling them and licking each tiny face. "You've been trying to care for all of them yourself," Olivia said softly, watching Shadow's maternal devotion. "Including this little one that isn't even yours." The question of where the 3rd puppy had come from nagged at her. Had Shadow found it abandoned? Had she somehow adopted an orphaned puppy from another litter? The thought squeezed Olivia's heart, this malnourished dog sharing what little she had with a puppy that wasn't even her own. Her phone showed no service, which wasn't surprising given the remote location and the storm. They were on their own, at least until the weather cleared. Exploring the house quickly, Olivia found the kitchen still had running water, though it sputtered and ran rust-colored at first. The electricity was off, but she located candles in a drawer and matches on top of the refrigerator. Soon, a warm glow illuminated the living room, where she'd created a more comfortable nest for the puppies using cushions and a musty quilt she'd found in a closet. "First things first," she told Shadow, who hadn't left her puppy's side. Let's get some water into all of you." She found a shallow bowl and filled it for Shadow, who lapped thirstily but kept breaking off to check her puppies. For the little ones. Olivia tore a clean dishcloth into strips, soaked the ends, and carefully let drops of water fall into their tiny mouths. The two stronger puppies responded, swallowing weakly. But the smallest one barely reacted. "Come on, little one," she urged, her throat tight. "Just a little water." As she worked, memories she'd kept locked away for 2 years resurfaced. The shelter fire, the frantic evacuation, the kennel door that had jammed, trapping the mother dog and her week-old puppies. How Olivia had struggled with the lock until her hands blistered, until the firefighters had physically dragged her out, her lungs full of smoke and her heart shattered. The smallest puppy finally swallowed a few drops, and Olivia exhaled shakily. "Good job, buddy." A sudden noise from the front of the house made her freeze. Shadow's ears pricked up, and she stood protectively over her puppies, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "Hello?" called a gruff voice. "Anybody in there?" Footsteps approached, and Sheriff Jim Calloway appeared in the living room doorway, rain dripping from his uniform hat. His hand rested warily on his holstered gun as he took in the scene, Olivia kneeling by the puppies, Shadow standing guard, candles flickering around them. "Miss Thompson," he said, clearly surprised. "Martha Wilson said she saw you heading this way with the Miller dog. You're trespassing on private property, ma'am." "These puppies need help," Olivia said, straightening up. "They're sick, injured. Shadow has been trying to find help for days. That's why she's been approaching people in town." The sheriff's gaze shifted to the puppies, and his stern expression softened slightly. "Well, I'll be damned. That explains a lot." "Please," Olivia said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "They need a vet, especially this little one." She gestured to the smallest puppy, whose breathing seemed even more labored than before. Sheriff Calloway sighed heavily, removing his hat to run a hand through his graying hair. "Dr. Hayes closed up early because of the storm, and County Animal Services won't send anyone out in this weather." "Then help me get them to her house. These puppies won't make it through the night without medical attention." Something in her tone must have reached him, because after a moment's consideration, the sheriff nodded. "My cruiser's out front. We can use it to transport them. But I can't guarantee the doc will be happy about us showing up on her doorstep." Relief flooded through Olivia. "Thank you." As they carefully prepared to move the puppies, Sheriff Calloway surveyed the abandoned house. "You know, Frank didn't just up and leave this place. Everyone assumed he did, but—" "What happened to him?" Olivia asked, gently wrapping the puppies again. The sheriff's face took on a closed expression. "That's complicated. Let's focus on getting these animals some help first." As they worked together, Shadow watched them both with those intelligent eyes, her body still positioned protectively near her puppies. But now there was something new in her gaze when she looked at Olivia, something that looked remarkably like hope. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, something had shifted. For the first time in 2 years, Olivia felt the protective walls around her heart beginning to crack. The drive to Dr. Hayes's house was tense, with Shadow whining softly in the back seat as she huddled protectively around her puppies. The storm had intensified, turning the rural roads into treacherous rivers of mud and debris. Sheriff Calloway navigated with the focused concentration of a man who had weathered many such tempests, occasionally muttering under his breath when the cruiser's tires lost traction momentarily. "Been meaning to ask," he said, breaking a long silence. "What made you follow that dog? Most folks in town been avoiding her for days." Olivia kept her eyes on the bundle of puppies in her lap, particularly the smallest one whose breathing seemed more labored with each passing minute. "I recognized something in her eyes," she said finally. "Not just hunger or fear. Purpose." The sheriff glanced at her. "You know dogs pretty well." Then, "I used to." The words felt like pebbles in her mouth. "In another life." To her relief, Calloway didn't press further. They turned onto a gravel driveway leading to a modest craftsman-style house set back among towering pines. A small wooden sign reading Hayes Veterinary Services swung violently in the wind. "Hope she's home," Calloway muttered as he killed the engine. Dr. Eleanor Hayes was indeed home, opening her door with an expression that shifted from annoyance to professional concern the moment she spotted the bundle in Olivia's arms, in her late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a practical bun. She had the weathered hands and direct gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime tending to animals in crisis. "Jim Calloway, I swear to high heaven, this better be important enough to—" Her eyes landed on Shadow, who had leapt from the cruiser and now stood anxiously at Olivia's side. "Well, butter my biscuit. That's Frank Miller's dog." "She has puppies," Olivia said, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. "3 of them. They're in bad shape." Dr. Hayes's kitchen had been converted into a makeshift examination room, with a stainless steel table pushed against one wall and cabinets filled with medical supplies. She cleared space quickly, her initial reluctance replaced by efficient professionalism. "Let's see what we've got here," she said, gently taking the bundle from Olivia. The examination was thorough but quick. Dr. Hayes's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking each puppy's vitals, examining the wounds, assessing their overall condition. Shadow watched anxiously from the floor, whining softly when the smallest puppy yelped weakly during the examination. "These 2 are dehydrated and malnourished, but they'll pull through with proper care," Dr. Hayes announced, indicating the German Shepherd puppies. "The bites aren't deep, thankfully. Probably a possum rather than rats, given the tooth pattern." Her expression grew more serious as she examined the smallest puppy. "This little one, though, he's in critical condition. Severe dehydration, possible internal infection, and he's definitely not from Shadow's litter, different breed altogether. At least 2 weeks younger." "Can you save him?" Olivia asked, her throat tight. Dr. Hayes didn't offer false reassurance. "I'll do everything I can, but prepare yourself. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is end suffering." "No," Olivia said, with a vehemence that surprised even herself. "Please, try everything first." Something in her tone made both Dr. Hayes and Sheriff Calloway look at her more closely. "You care an awful lot about some stray puppies, Miss Thompson," the sheriff observed. "Everyone deserves a fighting chance," she replied, avoiding his gaze. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Dr. Hayes administered subcutaneous fluids to all 3 puppies, cleaned and treated their wounds, and set up a warming area using heated blankets. She showed Olivia how to mix a special formula for newborn puppies and demonstrated the delicate process of feeding them using a tiny syringe. Shadow received attention to antibiotics for an infection Dr. Hayes discovered in a cut on her paw, a thorough examination that revealed her generally poor condition, and finally, a substantial meal that the exhausted dog consumed with desperate gratitude. She's been starving herself to produce what little milk she could for these babies, Dr. Hayes explained as they watched Shadow eat, including for one that isn't even hers. That's remarkable maternal instinct. Throughout the evening, Olivia found herself sharing more than she had intended. Perhaps it was the stress of the situation, or maybe it was Dr. Hayes's no-nonsense yet compassionate manner. But the story of the shelter fire spilled out as they worked together to save the puppies. "I was the last one in the building," Olivia said quietly, her hands mechanically preparing another syringe of formula. "The smoke was so thick I could barely see, but I heard the mother dog barking. When I found her kennel, the lock had warped from the heat. I couldn't open it." She swallowed hard. "The firefighters pulled me out, but I still hear her barking in my dreams." Dr. Hayes listened without interrupting, her hands never ceasing their methodical work. When Olivia finally fell silent, the veterinarian nodded once. "That's a heavy burden to carry alone, but this," she gestured to the puppies they were tending, "this is not that day. These little ones still have a chance." By midnight, the storm had somewhat abated, though rain still drummed steadily on the roof. Sheriff Calloway had left to handle a downed power line in town, promising to return in the morning. Dr. Hayes had converted her sunroom into a recovery area for Shadow and her puppies, complete with soft bedding and the warmth of a space heater powered by her generator. The 2 German Shepherd puppies, whom Dr. Hayes had begun calling Scout and Daisy, were showing improvement, accepting more formula and moving with greater strength. The smallest puppy, now dubbed Buddy, remained in critical condition, receiving tiny amounts of fluid and antibiotics every hour. As Olivia prepared for another feeding, Dr. Hayes appeared with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a thoughtful expression. "Been meaning to tell you something about Frank Miller," she said, settling into a chair near the puppy's makeshift nest. "Since you've taken such an interest in his dog." Olivia accepted the coffee gratefully. "Sheriff Calloway started to say something earlier but changed the subject. Jim's always been tight-lipped about Frank. They served together in the Gulf. Had some falling out years ago." Hayes took a sip of her coffee. "But the truth is, Frank didn't abandon Shadow. About 3 weeks ago, Marjorie from the grocery found him collapsed on his kitchen floor, massive stroke. He's been in county hospital ever since, can barely speak. Certainly couldn't tell anyone about Shadow." The revelation hit Olivia like a physical blow. So she's been trying to survive on her own all this time, pregnant and then with newborn puppies. And somehow she acquired that 3rd puppy too, Dr. Hayes added. "My guess is she found an abandoned litter, maybe from one of the feral dogs out by the creek, and decided to take one in. German Shepherds can be remarkably altruistic that way." Olivia looked at Shadow, who had positioned herself protectively around all 3 puppies, showing no favoritism toward her biological offspring. "She's been trying so hard to save them all," she whispered. "Reminds me of someone else I've met recently," Dr. Hayes replied with a meaningful look. The following morning brought watery sunshine and the buzzing of Olivia's phone as service was restored. There were missed calls from her editor in Atlanta and a text from Martha Wilson of all people, asking if she was safe after the storm. Sheriff Calloway returned as promised, bearing breakfast from Miss Lila's diner and news that the storm had caused significant flooding along the creek, including on Frank Miller's property. "That shed's completely underwater now," he reported. "If you hadn't found those puppies when you did—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. While they ate, Dr. Hayes outlined what would need to happen next. "These puppies need round-the-clock care for at least the next 2 weeks. Shadow's improving, but she's still malnourished and can't produce enough milk on her own. The county shelter can take them," Sheriff Calloway suggested, though he sounded doubtful even as he said it. Dr. Hayes shot him a withering look. "That place is overcrowded and understaffed. Jim, and you know it. They'd be euthanized within days, especially the little one." "I'll take them," Olivia said, surprising herself as much as the others. "I have the time, and my cottage has plenty of space." The words had left her mouth before she could fully consider their implications. After 2 years of carefully avoiding any responsibility for another living creature, she was volunteering to care for 3 critical puppies and their mother. "You sure about that?" Sheriff Calloway asked. "It's a big commitment." Olivia looked at Shadow, who seemed to be watching the conversation with those intelligent eyes. "I'm sure." And so began a new chapter in Olivia's carefully constructed solitude, with supplies and detailed instructions from Dr. Hayes. She converted her living room into a puppy nursery. Every 2 hours, she dutifully prepared formula, gently fed each puppy with the small syringe, cleaned them, checked their temperatures, and administered medications. Shadow rarely left their side except to eat or go outside briefly, always rushing back to count her charges with gentle nose nudges. Word spread quickly through Pinewood Creek about the city girl who saved Frank's dog. Some, like Martha Wilson, brought casseroles and offered help with the feedings. Others, like Mrs. Gunderson, stopped by primarily to satisfy their curiosity, but found themselves charmed by the puppies and their devoted mother. "I feel just terrible for shooing her away," Mrs. Gunderson admitted on her second visit. "Poor thing was just trying to get help for her babies." Not everyone was supportive. However, some townsfolk grumbled about resources being wasted on just dogs when the storm had damaged homes and businesses. During one feeding session, Olivia overheard 2 men talking on her front porch. "Don't see why everyone's making such a fuss," one said. "Old Frank ain't never coming back from that stroke, and we'll end up with 4 more strays in this town. County shelter would have put 'em down quick and humane," the other agreed. "Sometimes that's the kindest thing." Olivia's hands shook with anger as she finished feeding Scout, but she said nothing. These were the people she'd have to live alongside if she stayed in Pinewood Creek, and she wasn't ready to burn those bridges. As days passed, both Scout and Daisy thrived, their eyes opening to reveal the world around them, their little bodies growing plumper and stronger. Buddy's progress was slower, his survival still uncertain. But he fought with a determination that Olivia found herself admiring. Shadow watched over them all with equal devotion, showing no preference for her biological puppies over the adopted one. During quiet moments between feedings, Olivia found herself talking to Shadow, sharing thoughts she hadn't voiced aloud in years. "I understand why you did it," she said one evening, as they sat together watching the puppies sleep. Why you saved Buddy even though he wasn't yours. You couldn't leave him behind. Her throat tightened. I wish I could have saved them all, too. Shadow laid her head on Olivia's lap, those amber eyes gazing up with what seemed like understanding. It was the first time the dog had initiated such contact, and Olivia found herself weeping silently. Years of pent-up grief finally finding release as she stroked Shadow's still thin coat. 1 week after finding the puppies, Olivia received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Hayes arrived with medical supplies, but also a troubled expression. There's something you should know, she said after examining the puppies and pronouncing Scout and Daisy out of the woods while Buddy remained guarded but improving. What is it? Olivia asked, recognizing the seriousness in the veterinarian's tone. I visited Frank Miller at County Hospital yesterday, Dr. Hayes said, settling onto Olivia's couch. His condition is improving somewhat. He can speak a few words now. Use his right hand a little. When I told him Shadow was safe, he became quite agitated, trying to tell me something. She paused. It took some time to understand, but he kept saying Shadow knows and shed key. Olivia frowned. Shed key. What does that mean? I'm not entirely sure, Dr. Hayes admitted. But Frank was insistent enough that I thought you should know. He seemed to think it was vitally important. After Dr. Hayes left, Olivia found herself staring thoughtfully at Shadow. What do you know? Girl, what was Frank trying to tell us? Shadow offered no answers, but the question lingered in Olivia's mind as she went about her daily routine of caring for the growing puppies. What secret could possibly be hidden in that dilapidated shed, now flooded by the storm? And how could it be important enough for a man recovering from a stroke to struggle so desperately to communicate? As she pondered these questions, Olivia was unaware that events were already in motion that would soon force answers to the surface, answers that would shake the foundations of Pinewood Creek and test her newfound purpose in ways she could never have anticipated. The weather forecast had promised clear skies, but Pinewood Creek residents knew better than to trust meteorologists during storm season. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered again on the horizon, and the barometric pressure drop made Olivia's ears pop as she hurried to secure her porch furniture. Looks like we're in for round 2, Martha Wilson called from across the street, where she was similarly battening down her wind chimes and potted plants. Radio says it might be worse than last week's blow. Olivia nodded grimly. Inside her cottage, Shadow had grown restless, pacing between the puppy nest and the windows, whining softly whenever thunder rumbled in the distance. The puppies, now 12 days old by Dr. Hayes's estimate, were becoming more active each day. Scout and Daisy had begun crawling with determination, their eyes fully open and taking in the world with typical puppy curiosity. Even Buddy, still smaller than his adopted siblings but fighting valiantly, had started making exploratory movements and responding more vigorously during feedings. The first heavy raindrops were just beginning to fall when Sheriff Calloway's cruiser pulled into Olivia's driveway. He emerged looking grim, his uniform already spattered with rain. "Miss Thompson," he said without preamble when she opened the door. "Creek's rising fast. They're evacuating everyone within 3 blocks of the water line, including your place here." Olivia glanced back at the puppies. "I can't just leave them. They need feeding every few hours, and moving them could be dangerous for Buddy." The sheriff's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I understand your concern, but we've got a flash flood warning in effect. This whole area could be underwater by midnight." Where are people going? High school gymnasium's been set up as a shelter. Seeing her hesitation, he added, "No pets allowed, officially speaking, but I reckon we could make an exception given the circumstances." The thought of trying to maintain the puppy's careful feeding and medication schedule in a crowded gymnasium filled Olivia with dread. What about Dr. Hayes's place? It's on higher ground. Already checked. Tree came down on her clinic section during the night. Building's not safe. Sheriff Calloway glanced at his watch. You've got about an hour before they close the roads. I'd suggest you decide quickly what you're taking with you. After he left, Olivia stood in her living room, mind racing. Shadow watched her with those intelligent eyes, seeming to sense the dilemma. We need somewhere quiet, warm, and safe, Olivia told her, thinking aloud. Somewhere I can continue your puppy's care without interruption. An idea formed in her mind, risky, perhaps even foolish, but potentially the best option available. Frank Miller's house sat on a slight rise, well above the creek's floodline according to the local flood map she'd studied after the last storm. While the shed had been inundated, the main house had remained dry. With no electricity, it wouldn't be comfortable. But she had supplies now: formula, medications, heating pads that could run off her car's power inverter. Decision made. Olivia moved with focused efficiency. She packed the puppy's supplies, her emergency kit, food for Shadow and herself, blankets, and her battery-powered lanterns. The puppies went into a padded laundry basket, secured with a breathable cover. Shadow watched the preparations anxiously, staying close to her babies throughout. By the time they set out in Olivia's SUV, the rain was coming down in sheets. The local radio station was broadcasting continuous weather updates, reporting road closures and rising water levels throughout the county. The streets of Pinewood Creek were largely deserted, with most residents either evacuated or hunkered down in their homes. The drive to Frank Miller's property took nearly twice as long as it should have, with Olivia forced to detour around flooded sections of road. When they finally arrived, the old farmhouse stood dark against the stormy sky, windows like blind eyes watching their approach. The shed where she'd first found the puppies was now completely submerged, with only its roof visible above the muddy water. "This is it, girl," Olivia told Shadow as they made their way to the back door, protecting the puppy basket from the driving rain. "Home sweet home, at least for tonight." Inside, the house was exactly as they'd left it a week earlier, musty, abandoned, but structurally sound. Olivia quickly established their base in the living room, setting up the puppy's nest on the couch and arranging her supplies within easy reach. She connected a heating pad to the power inverter she'd plugged into her car, creating a warm spot for the puppies that would last as long as she had gas in her tank. The storm intensified as evening approached. Wind howled around the old house, finding every crack and crevice to whistle through. Rain lashed against the windows with such force that Olivia worried the glass might shatter. Through it all, she maintained the puppy's schedule warming formula over a camping stove, administering medications, checking temperatures, encouraging each tiny bladder and bowel to function with gentle stimulation. Shadow remained unusually agitated. However, even after her puppies were fed and settled, she continued pacing between the living room and the kitchen, whining softly and looking back at Olivia as if trying to communicate something urgent. "What is it, girl?" Olivia asked during one such episode. "The puppies are fine. We're safe here. But Shadow's behavior grew more insistent. She would go to the kitchen door that led to the backyard, paw at it, then return to Olivia with increasingly distressed whines. "I can't let you out in this storm," Olivia told her firmly. "Whatever critter you're hearing out there will have to fend for itself." Around midnight, during a brief lull in the storm, Olivia's phone rang unexpectedly. The screen showed Dr. Hayes's number. "Are you safe?" the veterinarian asked without preamble. "Yes. We're at Frank Miller's place. It's on high ground. The puppies are doing well. Even Buddy took his full feeding tonight." There was a pause. "You're at Frank's house." "Good. That's actually why I'm calling. I visited him again today. He was more coherent, and what he told me was concerning." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft whistling through the old house. "What did he say?" "He kept talking about something hidden in the floor of the shed. Something dangerous. He was trying to warn Shadow away from it. Dr. Hayes's voice was grim. "Olivia, I think he might have buried something toxic out there. Maybe old chemicals or pesticides. If that shed's flooded, and whatever's out there is leaching into the groundwater." The implications hit Olivia immediately. The shed where Shadow had kept her puppies, where they might have been exposed to unknown toxins. Could that explain Buddy's struggle to thrive? Could they all be at risk? "I need to check the puppies for symptoms," she said, already moving toward the couch. "What should I look for?" "Tremors, unusual breathing patterns, lethargy beyond what's normal for their age." Dr. Hayes listed. "But Olivia, there's something else. Frank mentioned—" The connection abruptly cut off as another powerful gust of wind howled around the house. Olivia tried redialing, but the call wouldn't go through. Cell service had been knocked out by the storm. Heart racing, she examined each puppy carefully. Scout and Daisy seemed normal, sleeping peacefully in their warm nest. Buddy, however, felt unusually warm to the touch. When she took his temperature, it registered 103, definitely elevated. "No, no, no," she murmured, reaching for the emergency medications Dr. Hayes had provided. Shadow watched anxiously, sensing something was wrong with her smallest charge. As Olivia prepared a dose of fever-reducing medication, a tremendous crash shook the house. She froze, listening intently over the storm's fury. It had sounded like something heavy falling, or someone breaking in. Shadow's reaction was immediate and alarming. Her hackles rose, and she positioned herself between the puppies and the hallway leading to the front of the house, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "Stay here," Olivia whispered. Though she knew the dog wouldn't leave her puppies, she reached for the only potential weapon at hand, a heavy flashlight from her emergency kit. Heart pounding, she edged toward the hallway. The old house creaked and moaned under the storm's assault, making it impossible to distinguish natural noises from human movement. She swept her flashlight beam slowly across the front room's dining room, study, entryway, finding nothing out of place except a fallen picture frame that must have been dislodged by the wind. Just as she began to relax, thinking the noise had been storm-related after all, she caught a glimpse of movement through the front window, a flashlight beam cutting through the rain, moving toward the house. Someone was definitely out there. Olivia retreated to the living room, mind racing. Her phone still showed no service. Shadow's growling had intensified, and now even Scout and Daisy were stirring restlessly, picking up on their mother's anxiety. But it was Buddy who suddenly demanded her full attention. The tiny puppy had begun trembling violently, his small body rigid with what appeared to be seizures. "No, please," Olivia pleaded, gathering him into her hands. His temperature seemed even higher now, his breathing increasingly labored. Outside, the flashlight beam had reached the front porch. The door handle rattled, trapped between the advancing stranger and Buddy's medical crisis. Olivia made the only choice her heart would allow. She turned her back to the door, focusing entirely on the struggling puppy in her hands, trying desperately to remember Dr. Hayes's instructions for emergency situations. The front door burst open with a crash that startled even Shadow into momentary silence. Cold wind and rain gusted into the house, along with the beam of a powerful flashlight that found Olivia crouched by the puppy nest. "Don't move," commanded a rough male voice. Olivia didn't even look up. "Either help me or shoot me," she said with surprising steadiness. "But this puppy is dying, and I won't stop trying to save him." There was a startled pause, then the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. The flashlight beam lowered to illuminate Buddy's tiny, convulsing form in her hands. "Jesus Christ," the voice said, now directly above her. "What's wrong with it?" "Seizure. Possible toxin exposure. I need to cool him down and get this medication into him." Olivia still hadn't looked up at the intruder, her entire focus on the fading life in her hands. To her shock, the stranger knelt beside her, setting down the flashlight. "Tell me what to do." The stranger's hands were large but surprisingly gentle as he followed Olivia's terse instructions, holding Buddy steady while she administered the anti-seizure medication. Shadow's initial growling had subsided into watchful uncertainty, her protective instinct seemingly at war with something else recognition. Perhaps, "Wrap him in this damp cloth," Olivia directed, passing over a kitchen towel she'd soaked in cool water. "Not too tight. We need to bring his temperature down gradually." Only when Buddy's violent tremors began to ease did Olivia finally look up at her uninvited assistant. The man was in his 50s, broad-shouldered and weathered, with several days' worth of stubble and rain-soaked clothes plastered to his frame. What struck her most was the intensity of his gaze as he watched the tiny puppy in his hands, concern mingled with something that looked remarkably like guilt. "Who are you?" she asked, taking Buddy back and checking his breathing. "And why did you break into this house during a hurricane?" The man's eyes flicked to Shadow, who had moved closer, her tail giving a tentative wag. "Name's Martin Reeves. I was Frank Miller's sergeant in the Gulf." His voice was gravelly, as if rarely used. "As for why I'm here, same reason that dog keeps looking at the kitchen door like something's about to come through it. Frank called me from the hospital, said there was something dangerous buried in his shed, something that needed to be contained before the flooding got worse." Olivia's mind flashed to Dr. Hayes's cut-off phone call. Toxic chemicals. Martin's expression darkened. Worse. Unexploded ordnance? Military grade? Frank brought it back from overseas PTSD souvenir, you might say. He was paranoid the government was coming for him back then. He glanced at Shadow again. By the time he got his head straight and decided to dispose of it properly, he was too sick. Then the stroke hit, The implications settled over Olivia like a cold weight. The shed's completely flooded, if there's ammunition or explosives in there. Not just in there. Under it? Martin ran a hand through his wet hair. Frank built a kind of bunker beneath that shed years ago. He said Shadow knows where the access point is. That's why he was so desperate to contact someone. He was afraid she'd go back for her puppies and get hurt. Understanding dawned. Shadow's agitation tonight hadn't been random. She'd been trying to warn Olivia about the danger lurking just yards from the house. "We need to call the authorities," Olivia said, reaching for her phone, even knowing it had no service. "Already did, before I headed out here. Sheriff knows, and he's contacted the military EOD team. But with the roads flooded and the storm..." Martin shrugged. "Could be morning before anyone gets here. I came to secure the site. Make sure nobody stumbles into trouble." A tremendous crash from outside made them both jump. Through the rain-lashed windows, Olivia could see that one of the large oak trees near the property had finally succumbed to the wind and saturated ground, toppling with devastating force, directly onto the shed. "Damn it," Martin breathed, moving to the window. "That's torn the roof clean off. If water reaches the lower chamber..." Buddy gave a weak whimper in Olivia's hands, drawing her attention back to the immediate crisis. The puppy's seizures had stopped, but his breathing remained shallow and labored. The other two puppies were now fully awake, squirming and squeaking in distress. "I need to focus on these puppies," Olivia said firmly. "Especially this little one. He's critical." Martin turned from the window, his expression conflicted. "That runt's not going to make it," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Even if we weren't in the middle of a natural disaster with unexploded ordnance in the backyard, some animals just aren't strong enough." The words struck Olivia like a physical blow. They were the same words the fire captain had said to her 2 years ago as she'd fought to go back into the burning shelter. They're not going to make it. Some things just aren't meant to be saved. "No," she said, with a vehemence that seemed to surprise Martin. "I'm not giving up on him. Not again. Not ever again." Something shifted in Martin's weathered face. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow stubborn soul. "All right, then. You focus on the pups. I'll check the shed situation. See if I can at least mark off the danger area until help arrives." "You can't go out in this," Olivia protested, even as she continued monitoring Buddy's breathing. "It's too dangerous," says the woman who drove out here with 3 newborn puppies during a flood warning. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, I owe Frank this much at least." Before Olivia could argue further, Martin had zipped up his rain jacket and headed for the back door. Shadow whined anxiously, torn between staying with her puppies and following the man who seemed to know something about the danger she'd been trying to alert them to. "Stay, girl," Olivia told her gently. "Your babies need you here." For the next hour, Olivia fought her own private battle against death as Buddy's condition fluctuated wildly. The tiny puppy would seem to stabilize, only to begin struggling again minutes later. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, and occasionally she caught glimpses of Martin's flashlight beam as he worked around what remained of the shed. "Come on, Buddy," she murmured, cradling the puppy against her chest to share her body heat after his temperature had plummeted following the fever. "You've made it this far. Don't give up now." But despite her encouragement, despite the medications and the warming techniques Dr. Hayes had taught her, Buddy's breaths grew increasingly shallow and farther apart. His tiny body, already so fragile, seemed to be giving up the fight that had sustained him against all odds these past weeks. Shadow sensed it first. The German shepherd moved to Olivia's side, whining softly as she nosed at her smallest puppy. There was understanding in those amber eyes, the understanding that comes only to those who have witnessed both birth and death. "No," Olivia whispered, tears blurring her vision as she felt Buddy's heartbeat weaken beneath her fingertips. "Please, no." But her pleas went unheeded by whatever forces govern the fragile boundary between life and death. With one final, shuddering breath, the tiny puppy grew still in her hands. Olivia's anguished cry was lost in a deafening explosion that rocked the entire house, shattering windows and sending objects crashing to the floor. Shadow barked frantically, positioning herself over Scout and Daisy as plaster dust rained down from the ceiling. In the sudden, terrible silence that followed, Olivia clutched Buddy's lifeless body to her chest and realized with gut-wrenching clarity Martin had been at the shed when it blew. 2 lives lost in the span of heartbeats. 2 battles she had fought with everything she had, and lost anyway. The familiar darkness of failure closed around her heart once more. The silence following the explosion lasted only seconds, before being replaced by the renewed fury of the storm. Rain lashed through the broken windows, and the wind howled through the house like a living thing. Scout and Daisy squealed in distress as cold air hit their fragile bodies, while Shadow barked anxiously, torn between protecting her surviving puppies and responding to the catastrophe outside. Olivia remained frozen, Buddy's tiny form cradled against her chest, her mind struggling to process the twin tragedies that had just occurred. Then, through her shock, a single coherent thought emerged. Scout and Daisy were still alive, still in danger from the cold and the flying glass. She had failed Buddy and possibly Martin, but she could still protect these 2 innocent lives. Moving mechanically, she placed Buddy's body gently in a small box, unable to bear the thought of simply discarding him. Then she gathered the remaining puppies in Shadow, retreating to the bathroom, the only room without windows, and sealed the door against the invading elements. Using towels to create a makeshift nest in the bathtub, she settled the puppies and their mother into relative safety. "Stay," she instructed Shadow, who looked torn between remaining with her babies and investigating the explosion. Olivia stroked the dog's head. "I'll check. You keep them safe," pulling on her rain jacket. Olivia steeled herself to face whatever waited outside. The logical part of her brain said there was little chance Martin had survived such an explosion. But she couldn't simply hide in the bathroom without checking. She owed him that much at least. The kitchen door had been blown partially off its hinges by the blast. Forcing it open against the wind required all her strength. Outside, the rain fell in horizontal sheets, stinging her face and instantly soaking any part of her not covered by the jacket. Her flashlight beam cut weakly through the darkness, illuminating a scene of devastation. Where the shed had stood was now a smoking crater, surrounded by debris scattered across the yard. The fallen oak tree lay shattered, its massive trunk split by the force of the explosion. There was no sign of Martin. "Martin," she called, her voice swallowed by the storm. Martin Reeves. Logic told her it was hopeless. No one could have survived being that close to the blast. But something drove her forward, stumbling through the debris-strewn yard, sweeping her flashlight across the darkness. The rain had already formed deep puddles throughout the property, some concealing treacherous debris beneath their innocent surfaces. She had nearly given up when her light caught something moving near the edge of the property, where the yard met the encroaching floodwaters from the creek. A hand, raised weakly above a partially submerged form. "Martin!" Olivia splashed toward him, heedless of the danger. The man lay half in, half out of a drainage ditch, his lower body submerged in rising water. His face was bloody, his clothing torn, but his eyes flickered open at her approach. "Told you. To stay." "Inside," he managed, each word clearly causing pain. "Shut up and let me help you," Olivia replied, already assessing his injuries. The fact that he was conscious and speaking was miraculous enough. His right leg was clearly broken, the bone visible through torn flesh, and burns covered his left side. But he was alive. "Explosion? Through me?" he gasped as she tried to help him into a more stable position. "Water. Cushioned." "Save your strength," she told him, mind racing. She couldn't move him alone, and even if she could, the house was compromised. They needed help, and quickly. As if in answer to her unspoken prayer, headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway, two vehicles approaching slowly through the storm. Her flashlight beam wouldn't reach that far, so Olivia improvised, taking off her white rain jacket and waving it frantically above her head. The lead vehicle, which she now recognized as Sheriff Calloway's cruiser, flashed its high beams in acknowledgement and accelerated as much as the flooded drive would allow. Behind it came an ambulance, its emergency lights cutting through the darkness. "Help's coming," she told Martin, who had begun shivering violently. Shock was setting in, and hypothermia wouldn't be far behind with half his body submerged in floodwater. "Just hang on." What followed was a blur of activity. Paramedics stabilized Martin while Sheriff Calloway helped Olivia back to the house to retrieve Shadow and the puppies. The bathroom had remained relatively dry, and both Scout and Daisy were mercifully unharmed. Though distressed by the commotion, Shadow refused to leave the house until Olivia had gathered both puppies and the box containing Buddy's small body. "The military EOD team is on their way," Sheriff Calloway explained as they carefully made their way to his cruiser. "Martin managed to call in his location just before all hell broke loose. Said something about unauthorized ordnance. Frank was keeping explosives under the shed," Olivia confirmed, settling Shadow and the puppies into the back seat. "Military-grade stuff he brought back from overseas." The sheriff's weathered face creased with concern. "And you knew about this when you decided to ride out the storm here?" "Not until Martin showed up," she admitted. "Dr. Hayes tried to warn me, but the call dropped." Calloway's expression shifted from concern to something harder. "So Frank Miller's been sitting on illegal explosives all these years, right in the middle of our town." He shook his head. "And to think I let him be. Figured his PTSD entitled him to some eccentricities." The accusatory tone in his voice sparked something defensive in Olivia. "He was sick," she said firmly. "He was trying to get help for it when the stroke hit, And now we've got a man fighting for his life because of it, Calloway countered, nodding toward the ambulance where paramedics were loading Martin's stretcher. Olivia had no answer for that. Instead, she clutched the box containing Buddy's body closer and turned her attention to keeping Scout and Daisy warm during the drive. The high school gymnasium was exactly as chaotic as Olivia had feared, crowded with displaced residents. Noisy, bright, and utterly unsuitable for newborn puppies. Fortunately, Martha Wilson intervened almost immediately upon their arrival. "You can't stay here with those babies," she declared, hands on her ample hips as she surveyed the situation. "You'll come to my sister's place on the north side. She's in Florida for the winter, and the house is sitting empty. High ground, generator, everything you need." Sheriff Calloway raised an eyebrow but didn't object. "That's technically outside the evacuation zone. I'll need your contact information. Miss Thompson, for the report." By dawn, Olivia had established a new temporary base at Martha's sister's comfortable ranch-style home. Scout and Daisy were settled in a laundry basket lined with soft towels. Shadow curled protectively around them. The puppy formula had survived the night's adventures, and both little ones had taken a good feeding despite the disruption to their routine. The storm had finally begun to abate, the wind dropping to occasional gusts, and the rain to a steady but less violent drumbeat on the roof. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, staring at Buddy's small body, now wrapped carefully in a soft blue washcloth. She had been unable to bring herself to bury him yet, unwilling to let go of the tiny life she had failed to save. Martha Wilson appeared with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, setting one in front of Olivia with unexpected gentleness. "You did everything you could for that little one," she said, nodding toward the small bundle. "Some aren't meant to make it in this world, no matter how much we wish otherwise." Olivia's throat tightened. "Everyone keeps saying that. But if I'd been faster, if I'd recognized the symptoms earlier—" "Child, I've lived 73 years on this earth, raised 4 children, and buried 2 before their time," Martha said, her usual bluntness softened by genuine compassion. "There are some things even love can't fix. Doesn't mean we stop trying. But we can't take on the weight of every loss as if it was ours to prevent." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the occasional whimper from the sleeping puppies and the steady breathing of Shadow, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion after her long vigil. Martha's ancient flip phone rang, startling them both. The older woman answered, listened for a moment, then held the phone out to Olivia. "It's Dr. Hayes. Wants to talk to you." Olivia took the phone with trepidation, half expecting more bad news. "Hello, Olivia. Thank God you're all right. I've been trying to reach you all night." Dr. Hayes's voice was tight with tension. "I'm at County Hospital. They brought in Martin Reeves a few hours ago." "I know," Olivia interrupted. "I was there when they found him. How is he?" "Stable. For now. But that's not why I'm calling." There was a pause. "I'm with Frank Miller. When they brought Martin in, Frank became extremely agitated, insisting on seeing him. They're old friends. Apparently, yes. They served together," Olivia confirmed, wondering where this was heading. "Well, seeing Martin seemed to trigger something. Frank's speech has improved dramatically. The doctors are calling it a breakthrough. And he's been asking about Shadow and her puppies non-stop. Another pause. Olivia, there's something you need to know about that third puppy, the one that isn't Shadow's. A cold feeling spread through Olivia's chest. Buddy died last night during the storm. Dr. Hayes's sharp intake of breath was audible even through the phone's tiny speaker. I'm so sorry. That's going to hit Frank hard when he hears it. Why? What did he tell you? That puppy wasn't just some stray Shadow adopted. Dr. Hayes said slowly. It belonged to Frank's granddaughter. She visits occasionally, or used to, before Frank's stroke. Apparently, she brought her new puppy last visit, and when she heard her grandfather was in the hospital, she left it with a neighbor to care for until she could return. But how did Shadow end up with it? Olivia asked, confused. The neighbor's house was damaged in a smaller storm about 3 weeks ago. Their fence came down and the puppy escaped. Frank thinks Shadow found it and, being the remarkable dog she is, took it in with her own litter. The revelation hit Olivia like a physical blow. Buddy hadn't been just any puppy. He had been a beloved pet, a connection to Frank's family. And now she would have to tell a recovering stroke patient that his granddaughter's puppy had died on her watch. There's more, Dr. Hayes continued, her voice careful. Frank's granddaughter is flying in today. Apparently. Martin called her last night before heading out to the property. She's his goddaughter. The interconnections were dizzying. Frank, Martin, the granddaughter, Shadow. The puppies all linked in ways Olivia couldn't have imagined when she first followed a desperate dog to an abandoned shed. I need to see him, Olivia said suddenly. Frank, I need to tell him about Buddy myself. I think that would be best. Dr. Hayes agreed. And Olivia, you might want to bring the body for closure, if nothing else. After hanging up, Olivia stared at the small blue bundle on the table, tears welling in her eyes. What had seemed like a random tragedy now carried the weight of human connection and loss. How could she face Frank Miller and tell him she had failed to save not just any puppy, but one that represented his link to family Shadow had risen and now stood beside her, those intelligent amber eyes fixed on Olivia's face. With gentle care, the dog nosed the blue bundle, then looked back at Olivia with what seemed like understanding. You knew all along, didn't you? Olivia whispered, stroking Shadow's head. You were trying to save them, both your puppies and Frank's connection to his granddaughter. Shadow's only response was to lay her head on Olivia's lap, a gesture of comfort that finally broke the dam holding back her tears. County Hospital stood on the outskirts of Pinewood Creek, a squat brick building that had served the community for generations. The storm had knocked out power to several wings, and diesel generators hummed steadily outside, providing electricity to critical care areas. The parking lot was dotted with fallen branches and debris, but the building itself had weathered the storm intact, a testament to the sturdy mid-century construction that had seen it through countless Gulf Coast tempests. Olivia sat in her car for several minutes, gathering courage. Beside her, the small blue bundle containing Buddy's body rested in a wooden cigar box Martha Wilson had contributed for the purpose. More dignified than a Tupperware container, the older woman had declared, Shadow had remained at Martha's sister's house with Scout and Daisy, reluctant to leave her surviving puppies, but seemingly understanding the importance of Olivia's mission when she'd carefully placed Buddy in the box. The hospital corridors were busy with storm-related injuries, broken bones from falls, lacerations from flying debris, even a few heart attacks triggered by the stress of evacuation. Dr. Hayes met Olivia in the lobby, her face lined with fatigue after what had clearly been a long night of emergency veterinary work followed by her hospital vigil. "Frank's on the 3rd floor," she said by way of greeting. "He's having a good day, cognitively speaking. The doctors are calling it a paradoxical response to emotional stress. Sometimes intense emotion can temporarily break through neurological barriers." "And Martin?" Olivia asked, clutching the small box against her chest. "4th floor ICU. Still critical but stable. Multiple fractures. 2nd-degree burns over 20% of his body. But the head CT came back clear, which is the best news possible given how close he was to the explosion." Dr. Hayes managed a tired smile. "He's a tough old bird, old. Has Frank's granddaughter arrived yet?" "Flight got diverted to Mobile because of the storm. She's driving in. Should be here within the hour." Dr. Hayes's gaze dropped to the box. "Is that—" Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "You did everything possible," the veterinarian reminded her gently. "Sometimes that's still not enough." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor seemed both too short and interminable. Olivia found herself mentally rehearsing what she would say to Frank Miller, a man she had never met, but whose life had become inextricably entwined with hers through the desperate actions of his loyal dog. Frank's room was at the end of a long corridor, the door partially open. Dr. Hayes knocked lightly before leading the way in. "Frank, there's someone here I'd like you to meet." The man in the hospital bed bore little resemblance to the imposing veteran Olivia had imagined. Stroke and illness had whittled him down to essential elements: sharp cheekbones, watchful eyes, skin like parchment stretched over a still proud framework of bones. His right side was clearly affected by the stroke, the arm lying inert on the blanket. But his left hand moved with surprising dexterity, adjusting the bed controls as they entered. "You're the woman who found Shadow," he said without preamble, his speech slow but remarkably clear. "Martin told me before he—" His voice faltered. "Before the shed." "Yes. Mr. Miller." "I'm Olivia Thompson." She stepped closer to the bed. "Shadow led me to her puppies. She's been trying to get help for them for days." A smile transformed Frank's face, softening the harsh lines of illness. "Smart girl, always too clever for her own good." The smile faded as his gaze settled on the box in Olivia's hands. "What's that?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. She had planned to ease into the difficult news, but Frank Miller was clearly not a man who appreciated circumlocution. Taking a deep breath, Olivia placed the box gently on the bed beside his good hand. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller. The smallest puppy, the one that wasn't Shadow's, didn't make it through the storm last night." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "I did everything I could." Frank's expression remained unnervingly still as he absorbed the news. Then, with careful movements, he lifted the lid of the box and gazed at the tiny form wrapped in blue cloth. His good hand trembled slightly as he touched the bundle. "Little fella fought hard," he said finally, his voice rough. "Longer than anybody had a right to expect." "You knew he was sick?" Olivia asked, surprised. Frank nodded slowly. "Lily, my granddaughter, her mother got him from a backyard breeder. Runt of the litter. All kinds of health problems from the start. Vet in Mobile told him he probably wouldn't make it to 6 months. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Lily insisted on taking him anyway. Said everybody deserves somebody who believes in them, no matter what the odds. The simple wisdom of a child who refused to give up on a struggling puppy struck Olivia to her core. It was exactly what she had been unable to do after the shelter fire, to continue believing, to keep fighting despite the odds. Shadow found him after the McCormick's fence came down, Frank continued. Don't know how she got him back to the shed without hurting him. Must have carried him gentle as a newborn. Pride suffused his voice. She always did have a soft spot for the underdogs, just like her master, I suppose. Dr. Hayes, who had been observing quietly from near the door, stepped forward. Frank, you should rest. You've had a lot of excitement for one day. I'll rest when I'm dead, Frank retorted, though the effort of speaking was clearly taxing him. Need to ask something first. His intense gaze fixed on Olivia. Shadow's other puppies, they okay? Yes. They're doing well, Olivia assured him. Scout and Daisy are getting stronger every day. They're with Shadow at a safe house north of town. Relief softened Frank's features. Good. That's good. He hesitated, then asked the question Olivia sensed had been weighing on him most heavily. And Shadow, how is she handling losing this one? It was a profound question, acknowledging the depth of grief animals can feel, something many people dismiss or overlook. Olivia considered her answer carefully. She knew before I did that he wasn't going to make it, she said finally. She stayed with him till the end, made sure he wasn't alone, and now she's focusing on her surviving puppies. But Olivia thought of the way Shadow had gently nosed the blue bundle before she left. She understands. She's grieving in her own way. Frank nodded, seemingly satisfied with this assessment. She's a better mother than most humans I've known. His eyelids drooped, the morning's exertions catching up with him. Will you bring her when it's safe to move her and the puppies? Of course, Olivia promised. As soon as the roads are passable. They left Frank drifting into sleep, the small box still resting beside his hand. In the corridor outside, Dr. Hayes touched Olivia's arm. You handled that remarkably well. Frank's not an easy man at the best of times, and these are far from the best of times. He loved that puppy without ever meeting him, Olivia said wonderingly. Just because his granddaughter did. That's Frank. Gruff as a bear on the outside, marshmallow on the inside. Doctor. Hayes checked her watch. Lily should be arriving soon. Would you like to stay and meet her? Olivia hesitated, then shook her head. I should get back to Shadow and the puppies. They've been through enough upheaval. In truth, she wasn't sure she could face the child whose pet had died under her care, no matter how inevitable that death might have been. As they walked toward the elevator, a commotion at the nurse's station caught their attention. A young girl of about 10 had arrived, accompanied by a harried-looking woman who was clearly her mother. The child's blonde hair was pulled into messy pigtails, and she clutched a well-loved stuffed dog to her chest. I need to see my grandpa and Uncle Martin right now, she was insisting with the imperious certainty of childhood. And my puppy Buster, they said he's here too. Olivia froze, the name hitting her like a physical blow. Buster. The puppy she had been calling Buddy had a name, a real name given by a real child who loved him. Before she could retreat, the girl's gaze landed on her and Dr. Hayes. Something in their expressions must have given them away, because the stuffed toy dropped from suddenly limp fingers. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice small but unwavering. "What happened to Buster?" Dr. Hayes stepped forward, clearly intending to shield Olivia from this difficult moment. But Olivia gently touched her arm to stop her. This was her responsibility, her burden to bear. Kneeling to meet the child's eyes, Olivia took a deep breath. "Are you Lily? I'm Olivia. I've been taking care of your grandfather's dog, Shadow, and her puppies, and Buster, too." The girl nodded, her eyes wide and already filling with tears, sensing what was coming. "Buster was very sick, sweetheart," Olivia said gently. "He fought so hard, and Shadow took amazing care of him. But last night during the storm, his little body just couldn't fight anymore." Lily's face crumpled, but she didn't break down as Olivia had feared. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most to her young heart. Was he scared? At the end, the simple, profound question caught Olivia off guard. Not, "Did you try everything?" or "Could he have been saved?" but concern for the emotional experience of the dying puppy. In that moment, Olivia understood exactly why Shadow had risked everything to save this child's pet, why Frank spoke of his granddaughter with such pride. "No, honey, he wasn't scared," Olivia answered truthfully. "Shadow was with him, and so was I. He was warm and safe and very loved." Lily nodded solemnly, accepting this comfort even as tears tracked down her cheeks. Then, to Olivia's astonishment, the child stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Olivia's neck in a fierce hug. "Thank you for trying," she whispered. "Grandpa says that's what matters most, not if you win, but if you try your hardest." As Olivia returned the embrace, something long broken inside her began, at last, to heal. In Shadow's story, we find what many of us understand deeply as we journey through our middle and later years, that love isn't measured by success, but by the courage to keep trying when failure seems inevitable. Like Frank Miller, many of us carry unseen wounds from our past. Like Olivia, we've all experienced failures that haunt us, moments when, despite our best efforts, we couldn't save what mattered most. And like Shadow, we know what it means to protect those we love against impossible odds, sometimes adopting others' burdens as our own. The loss of little Buster reminds us of those precious things we couldn't preserve. Yet Lily's wisdom, everybody deserves somebody who believes in them, no matter what the odds, offers the redemption many of us still seek, as we face our own storms, watching children grow distant and friends fade away.